Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Thanks for asking, Rory. Rory and I are delighted you've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 274. We're starting off today's episode with our student services, where we recognise the journey of those training to be counsellors and psychotherapists. And today we're going to be speaking about settling into a new counselling group. We then go on to our ethical, sustainable practice portion of today's episode, where we look at the building and running and growing of a private practice. And today we're going to be speaking about cultural competency. And then we go into Practice Matters, which is the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Today, an interview with Adam Cooper on Cognitive Behavioural Hypnotherapy and coaching. Some interesting niches there that may interest you. We're going to get all the lowdown there from Adam, and that's in that section. But we start with those student services, settling into a new counselling group. I guess, Rory, as we are making this real time, which is in September of 2023, new academic year in the United Kingdom, certainly many new courses starting, many progressing, going on into new groups. And settling into a new counselling group, it can be exciting, but it can bring some challenges, I guess.
Yes, indeed. And in the quiet few moments before we meet up to do the podcast, where I might think about an anecdote to share about training groups. I was taken back to my diploma training, which was, as regular listeners of the podcast would know, is almost 2 decades ago now. And I remember getting there early, because I kind of do that. I got there early, went into the classroom, and there was the circle of chairs, which is so familiar to those who've studied counselling. There's no desks. It's just a semi-circle of chairs, half circle of chairs. And there was one other person in the room, and I remember sitting there, and there was one other person, and if Karen's listening, hi Karen, if you're listening all these years later. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder who's going to come into the room. I wonder, because it was long before mobile phones and social media, so I had no idea who was going to come off my certificate course or anybody I might have known. And it was a bit nerve-wracking, to be honest, as all these new people came in. And by the time the room filled up, there was 17 of us. There was a palpable, for me, tension about who are these new people. Especially, the tension was especially heightened because in the July of the same year, I'd finished doing my certificate, and we'd bonded as a really loving, deep, reflective group. And of course, that ended, and we moved on to the next area of study. And I think that it can take some time for new groups to form. And, if you're the person in a group and you're thinking it feels a little bit uncomfortable, I think it's about giving it time. And there's a theory around this. And of course, it's Bruce Tuckman's model of group development, which is which is storming, forming, norming, and performing. So it's not unusual for there to be some stormy waters at the beginning of any kind of training group. And then eventually you start to form and you start to kind of know each other a bit better, and things kind of move on. It's not always the same with every group. Some groups just form and they get on great from the get-go. But it really is interesting. And having taught for 10 years, I have to say it was a process I saw in my students. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Ken, because I know we taught together for a time.
We did, yes. And I recognise that there are certain emotions that may be linked to that going into a new group. And within the handout that Rory has kind of very kindly made up for us, and we'll tell you how to get that in a moment, when we look at forming, the bringing together of the group, the kind of feelings that we might see during that time are anxiousness and nervousness, maybe fears going into what that may be, maybe even an element of helplessness or worried or confusion about what to expect from this new group and how that journey will unfold. And if you're feeling any of those listening to this, you're quite normal. That's kind of the emotions that can sometimes come up with that forming of a new group. And it's like any relationship, it takes time for the relationship to form. And I guess in a way it mirrors the counselling relationship. The difference being that in a counselling relationship, it's probably mostly a one-to-one, unless you're doing group or couples therapy. It's usually a one-to-one. But still, within a counselling relationship, we are forming that relationship, and we need to recognise that maybe a client is coming in feeling anxious, nervous, fearful, helpless, worried, confused as they're coming in. And this is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? Because if we can recognize these kind of emotions, and if we can see them in ourselves, and we can journal about them, then we can understand them better, and it can foster a level of empathy for those that come to see us one day. And it's part of that personal development. It's recognizing what feelings come up, journaling about them, and then kind of following that. How does that go as this group develops? Do you develop deep connections? Does it make you angry at times? There's a lot that can play out within a group, and it is a very, very rich area for personal development, specifically when you find yourself going, oh, that person really rubs me up the wrong way. That person speaks too much. That person is inappropriate. Because pointing outwards and saying that person is all good and well, they are who they are. What is interesting is the feelings that come up in you, what is triggered, what is created within your emotions and thoughts as that is playing out. That's where the work is. That's where the richness is. But we do recognize that new group going into it, it can be exciting for some. It can be disappointing for others. And an example of that, if you are on a progression route, you've just finished a level 3, you've made a real tight bond with your group, you know who the people are, and then suddenly you find yourself going on to a level 4 where maybe some of that group are present, but others are not there, and we've got some new people in that group. What does that bring up for you? It could bring up, oh, this is not like my old group. It's not like it used to be. And the truth is, even if a lot of the same people are with you in the new year, in a new group, it's still a brand new group, and it's still going to go through this forming, storming, norming, performing process that Rory has laid out.
Yes, and I love the fact that you've alluded to people thinking that it might not be like their old group, the group they had previously. And that's, of course, called mourning. That's the stage that was, I think, added later in the Tuckman model, mourning. And you have to move on. I also like, Ken, that you've alluded to something that's not often spoken about in counselling training.
Dun, dun, dun.
It's almost the hidden curriculum. And you very accurately outlined the journey of a student and their feelings from coming into the first teaching session to them coming out may very well mirror the feelings that a client has. And I think that is a very useful observation, because the whole process of counselling shouldn't just be about education and developing skills. Those are essential aspects of counselling education, but also to get a sense of the other, what it's like to be the other, the person who's sat in that seat. And I guess the way that's facilitated is by a good tutor. A good tutor will be able to play that out through the time, the arc of the training. And in fact, my tutor said, when everybody had come in, there was 17 in our training group, I seem to remember, said, this is a new group now. This is a new group, and made it explicit. And we had a new group contract. And through the 2 years we trained, we become very, very close. And at the end, it was quite a pull to move away from this unique training experience. And again, that mirrors what a client might go through at the end of therapy, not being able or maybe struggling to disengage. And again, a good tutor will facilitate that. And that's where the learning is. You see a tutor kind of prepare the group to move on into their own lives. And I guess, that is what we do as therapists, isn't it? So group development is an integral part not only of our own personal development, but for how we understand the arc of attachment through a therapy session that a client might experience.
Yes. It's interesting that you've spoken about that kind of ending of a group and where you might be there. And in the Tuckman's team development model, which you can get the handout for, we'll tell you where that is in a moment. The final phase of that is adjourning, that coming to an end. Everything has an end, and recognizing that end. And that can also bring with it sadness. It can bring happiness. I'm so glad that's over. There's a whole range of emotions that can go with that. And if you are progressing, chances are you've gone from adjourning and now going into the forming stage of a new group. And it is completely different. It's like starting over again. That forming phase, Rory, you mentioned a very important work there. In the hands of a competent, good tutor, it's the words that you use. Within that forming stage, you're looking to create the same kind of conditions that we want to create when a new client comes to see us. So from a tutor's point of view, first and foremostly, you're looking for a safe place. And you mentioned, Rory, maybe you're going to be looking at a group contract where people are contributing to what's this group going to be about and how is it going to run. And that is to create a safe place where you feel an element of psychological safety. And here it is again, really paralleling that counseling customers, clients journey, where the client needs to feel that psychological safety, needs to feel safe within the environment to be able to bring what they bring. Now, the interesting thing when we look at this Tuckman's model, some more, we go from the forming into the storming, and this is where we may get anger, frustration, hurt, being wary, annoyed, or resentful. And it's the storming is where we start seeing the different personalities interacting on one another. It's a very interesting viewpoint from being a tutor, because you can watch that play out and you can see how individuals are affected. You may find that within that group, people stop pushing against the boundaries of that group, testing the boundaries of the group. And it's not unusual. So if you're seeing this play out in your group, it is pretty much following the model that was kind of outlined. And then the norming. The norming is kind of gradually when this class moves into a stage where it feels normal. When we're getting together with our group, maybe it's something we look forward to. Maybe we feel hopeful. Maybe we feel relieved. Maybe we feel mindful. We know we're in a safe place. We know that everybody can express their opinions. We know that the boundaries that maybe have been pushed against have held in place, showing this as a safe place for us. And that norming is a wonderful place to be, where you're going into a group that, for better or for worse, is aiding in your personal development.
Absolutely, Ken. Absolutely. Hit nail head. Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to pick up on what you said about it being a safe space. I think that you could draw an analogy between maybe going on a climbing wall and being in a training group, in that the environment is around safety, but it may sometimes not feel safe, and that feeling of feeling a little bit unsafe is the process of personal development. And again, it's something that's echoed in client work, that as they start to unpack themselves, it may feel really not safe to do that. But the therapist provides a safe environment for a client to feel unsafe. And I think that a good tutor would do the same thing in a training group. And it can't be too understated that in an area of work where the evidence points strongly to the best outcomes for clients being the relationship of the therapist and the client, one of the strongest outcomes of someone being able to affect either a cure or be able to kind of move their lives on. I think that the PD group and indeed new groups are a cauldron for building that resilience that is needed to be a therapist. And just spare a thought for your tutor. If you're working with a client, you're working with one process. If you're working with 17 students, you're working with 17 processes.
Yes.
And it can feel bumpy. Your tutors, have to manage a lot of processes, and some of them can be quite opposing, certainly in PD groups. So, as I've always said, I've said this on the podcast before, counsellors aren't trained, they're forged. They're forged in the furnace of personal development.
Yeah.
And they're tempered in that. And hopefully at the other end, people come out of it more able to withstand the ebbs and flows of client work and, the impacts if you've got clients who may be projecting or maybe angry or maybe struggling with themselves. You're strong enough to be able to hold that client until they can hold themselves, if you like.
Very much so. And what I like about this topic that we're discussing is it kind of parallels something else again, that during your journey to become a counsellor, you're going to see again and again and again. And it's linking personal development to a theory. And here we're doing that. You may find yourself going into a new group now, or you may find yourself going back to a group that has already gone through that forming and norming stage, and it's now in that norming or performing stage of the group development. But we can recognize where we are based on a theory, and this theory is Tuckman's team development model. And what we'll do is we'll give you now where you can grab that handout. So the handout is available. It's one of Rory's super duper handouts, as always, kindly and lovingly crafted by Rory. And you'll get that by going to our mother website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, go to episode 274, and right there on that page you'll be able to download the handout on the team development model, and you can have a look through that and see where you are on that journey. And I kind of left off on norming, but I just did mention performing. So if we recap, we started with the forming, the coming together of that group, the storming, where we may see those different personalities kind of bumping against one another, pushing of those boundaries, the norming, where we're going, okay, this is okay, this group. I'm relieved to be here. I can be mindful and hopeful within this group and its course going forward. And then the performing is the ideal place that you want to find yourself within the group. And remember, this performing is about how you feel. And it's when you're going in and you're feeling empathic within that group. If somebody is saying something that maybe would have rubbed you up the wrong way, are we listening with empathy? Are we exercising those core conditions of what their opinion may be and how they are showing up, and recognizing they are a fellow human being and that they may have that opinion or act that way because of their road, not because of any personal agenda against you, and we only have that responsibility of how we feel. In that performing stage, you may find that the group is more relaxed. It is a valued place to be. People are more confident. Maybe the quieter members of the group are now starting to bring their opinions in the group. It is a great place to be, going from the norming into that performing, and I wish for you that you will spend a lot of time in your group in that performing part of the phase before going on to the adjourning, which is the ending part, where you may feel sad, happy, you may feel a loss, or you may feel gratitude to the group. You may feel a certain kind of love towards that group. And all of this is in the handout, so it is there for you. You can have a look at that, look at the theory, look at your journey. This is about you and your course that you're on, and map it to your personal development, because in the end, all of it is in service of the clients that will sit in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that norming, forming, and storming and performing might be that you're just more robust in your responses.
Yep.
That you say, no, it's not like that, it's like this. And these are my views. A agree to disagree situation, where you find yourself more able to be yourself and stand up for yourself,
Yep.
and to put your boundaries in. And doesn't that just kind of mark the journey that a client might have in therapy, Ken?
Oh yeah, and as you're kind of mentioning this as well, I'm also thinking of the arc of you within the group, how you develop within that group, and who you become in that group. And a great question to ask yourself at the end when you come to that adjourning is, am I the same person who stepped into the group in the very first place? Have you grown? Have you developed? What have you learnt? How may you apply that? And by journaling your journey, you can kind of look back on that. You can definitely write about it in your personal development assignment that we're all called on to write. And, when you were mentioning, Rory, that all the different people coming together, I think about it as almost like a vegetable soup. You wouldn't just want to sit and eat the carrots all the time. They might be very nice and you might like sweet carrots, but you need the turnips and you need the broccoli and you need the... and even if you don't like broccoli that much, maybe it's all right when it goes into the soup and becomes part of that makes up the group. It's all of the different ingredients that makes that group unique. It makes it yours, and it makes the adventure that you are on as a student right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure students don't sit, sure that tutors don't sit in front of saying, look, there's a spud, there's a turnip. Sure they don't think that. But I think the analogy is a useful one. It blends in, but the individuality of all the ingredients are still very much their own. Yeah, absolutely, Ken.
So there it is. That's our student services for today. Don't forget to get that handout, counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, episode 274. It is free. You can download it and hold that for when you write your journal or for when you kind of review this topic. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counsellingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counsellingskillsacademy.com. We move away from our student services into ethical, sustainable practice, recognizing that the starting and running of a counseling practice maybe sometimes take skills that we're not always taught during our core counselling training, business skills, bookkeeping, understanding tax. There's so much that is not covered in that core training. And something that is really, really important is that cultural competency. Yes, we do equality and diversity. We study that when we're training, equality and diversity. But that is a growing area that we need to do continuing professional development in, Rory.
Yes, absolutely. And I think our world has changed in recent years. We are now, and we're broadcasting from the UK, but I don't think this experience is unique to the UK. We are now a country of many cultures. And I think it's really important, if you are an independent practitioner, that you take some time to be introspective about your cultural competencies. What do you know about other people's cultures? And I'm going to share a little story which I think really kind of sums this up. I spoke to a colleague of mine who's British Asian therapist, and he was saying that he heard a story where a black client went into a organization that offered counselling, and the client said, "Do you counsel black people?" To which the response was, "Well, we counsel everybody. Of course we do." Now, on the face of it, that sounds like quite a reasonable response, but actually, you could view it in another aspect of, well, actually, I come from a specific culture. Have you got anybody who understands not just my difficulties, but my frame of reference?
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really important that if we were to counsel in the society that we find ourselves in now, September 2023, that we think about what are our cultural competencies? How much do we understand about others? Because there's a term called othering, where you see people as others as opposed to having a common humanity, but with a different culture. And I was listening to my playlist the other day, and I came across a song by Jarvis Cocker and Pulp called Common People. And it's a song about someone who's incredibly rich who decides to be working class, which is someone who came from a working class background really irritates me, I've got to be honest. And there's a lyric in there that is just so telling, and I think it's so accurate to where we may find ourselves. And it says, "You will never understand how it feels to live your life with no meaning or control and with nowhere left to go. You're amazed that they exist. They burn so bright, while you can only wonder why."
Wow.
And I think that speaks to both othering, and it speaks to someone who is a tourist as a therapist. And as Jarvis Cocker said, everybody hates a tourist. You don't want to be a tourist in somebody else's life. Yeah. You want to be able to engage. And if you think of a tourist as someone who points at the buildings and what's this and oh, well, this is an interesting drink. What's in it? You're not really part of understanding the culture. We've all come across people who visit countries and they stand out like a sore thumb because they've not done their research on the culture they're visiting. And I think the same thing applies to counselling. You don't have to be an expert on every single culture, but I think a degree of introspection and the ability to be able to say, if I'm offering counselling and my area has a predominant culture in it, I really need to make myself aware of what that is, do some training, and be introspective about it. Okay.
Very much so, Rory. And why are we covering this topic? The reason is it's about inclusive service. It's about inclusive service. Once we graduate and we're out and we're practicing, I guess this highlights the importance of that continuing professional development. Where are we putting our training needs? What are we looking? How are we kind of feeding that area so that we can stay on top of what's going on in the world? And there is, I guess, recently, neurodivergence has come to the fore. A lot more. The word has been coined recently. People are identifying as neurodivergent. There's a lot of information around. People are looking at dyslexia, ADHD, and recognizing maybe traits within themselves. I'm autistic. I found that from again watching television. I came across it. It wasn't freely available, but it's become more and more freely available, the information out there. And you mentioned the example that you gave, Rory, of the person, black person, going into counselling and saying, "Do you offer counselling to black people?" And you explained what that reply was. And I feel the same. If I was to go into counselling and I was to say, "Do you work with people with autism?" I wouldn't expect the person to say, "I work with everybody." I wouldn't feel valued in that conversation. No. I would want them to kind of indicate in some way that they understood me or they were the right fit for me, not brush me off with a broad stroke of counselling just works for everybody, because we have to be culturally aware. We have to be sensitive to who that person is. And we can't make it up. We can't make up what we might say to a person that presents with neurodivergence. We have to train to get these competences. Within Counselling Tutor, we're busy building a training course right now on identifying and working with those that are neurodivergent, and that'll be ready in some months, and we'll let you know when that is available. But I also recognize that our Counsellor CPD library has a area focused on equality, diversity, culture, different kinds of presentations. And of course, I'm thinking about Mahmood, who's been on our podcast many, many times. He's a regular guest. Hello, Mahmood. Who has made many lectures for us and really deep dives into this really, really important topic that makes us as counsellors more rounded and more able to offer that inclusive service. Because I guess we all want to at our core, but it's about having the knowledge to go with that. It doesn't run on instincts, this kind of stuff. You do need to learn about it.
Absolutely. And I think it's only fair that we give Mahmood his full name, Mahmood Ahmed, who's in fact, I think for me, coined the term culturally competent. So a great leader, great thought leader in cultural competence. And you're absolutely right. And it's just, it's the tiniest things, Ken, the tiniest things that make a difference. If I'd used the term dual burden, I wonder how many people know what that was. And in fact, it's a trauma, it's a term in trauma for minority groups who have been traumatized because of their difference. So a few years ago, we had a terrible incident where a gay couple were abused on a bus in London because they were gay, and they were attacked. And I don't know if they sought therapy, but if they did, a therapist would have to understand that not only was the process of being attacked traumatic, but the process of being attacked because I'm putting my inverted commas in the air here now, different, is equally as traumatic. And I think just knowing that is so helpful to a client who comes from a minority culture, because that way you get it closer to the approximation of what's going on for them. And it might be that a client comes to you and you think, I just don't think I'm culturally competent enough to work with this client. Neurodiversity is a classic one. Both Ken and myself are neurodiverse. And of course, I think it's worth reminding people at this point, once you've met one neurodiverse person, you met one neurodiverse person. You're not met us all. But I think if you haven't got that knowledge, I think it's only fair to think, well, can I work with them? There's an ethical aspect here. And again, the tiniest little things. I saw a therapist working with someone who was autistic. First question was, how do we meet? Do you want me to look at you in the eyes, or would you like me to look away?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And the person said, no, it's actually fine. I'm okay with it. But just that little bit of knowledge, so powerful for a client. Can you imagine someone who doesn't like being looked at, the therapist kind of staring at them, and how uncomfortable that could be, and they may not come back. So I think it's really important that anybody who practices nowadays looks to cultural competence and is really honest with themselves, is introspective, and say, well, how much do I know about that, and where can I get some training and some insight? And Ken, this comes up in our Facebook group time and time again. People asking the question about diversity and cultural competence, and neurodiversity is spoken about a lot. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, really simple, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We'll let you in, and you can join the conversation, Ken.
Oh yes. Come and become part of that conversation. It's a lovely group. It really is. I marvel at the discussions that happen there. A lot of people share parts of their journey, get a lot of feedback, advice, support. It's really a great place to be. So join us on that one. And that's kind of looking at the ethical, sustainable practice for this week. And we now move on to Practice Matters. And this is the part of the Counselling Tutor podcast that you can mark down on your CPD tracker. Why? Because any kind of attention that we give in an area that will help us better develop and understand our practice, our clients, is considered CPD. And every week on the Counselling Tutor podcast, we have Practice Matters just for you. And we try to bring in experts in topics. Rory, you met up with Adam Cooper, Cognitive Behavioural Hypnotherapy and Coaching. Now, you don't need to be a hypnotherapist or a coach to listen to this and get the CPD value from it. You may hear areas that become an interesting, maybe further training area for you. So, Rory, over to you.
Yes, and we've always spoke on the podcast about the best fit for clients. And speaking with Adam, he is serving military personnel. He's developed a program, if you like, to support people in the military or frontline services, wherever they be. And thank you for your service if you are one of those people who are listening. And he's a straight talking, no nonsense person who some people may very well find refreshing and help very, very helpful. And this is what he had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Sometimes with certain client groups, a different approach is needed in the service of therapy or relief from anxiety, stress, PTSD, which is why I'm delighted to have joining me today Adam Cooper, who's a cognitive behavioural hypnotherapist. He's a serving member of the Armed Forces, and we thank him for his service. And he's going to be speaking today about his approach to working with life's difficulties, and maybe we'll touch on specifically the fact that service personnel might need a slightly different approach. So, Adam Cooper, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Now, I guess my first question is, what's a cognitive behavioural hypnotherapist?
It is CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, combined with hypnotherapy. So it's the best bits of both. If you think about CBT just as a talking therapy, just to help solve problems in various ways, shapes or forms, and then hypnotherapy just brings the fact that you're going to tell yourself a different story.
Yeah.
Added bits of the both combined to make it better.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of, and I guess we'd call that an integrative or an eclectic approach, using two different theories and blending them together. Now, when we spoke before the podcast, one of the things, as a serving member of the military, is that you've identified that military personnel, maybe frontline personnel, police, paramedics, fire service personnel, may need a slightly different approach in terms of therapy. So I guess my first question is, why is that?
I think because of the jobs we do, we predominantly don't like fluff. The spiritual side, I'm involved in different networking groups, and I can speak from a serving member. We're a skeptical bunch. We like to see it proven. We like to cut through some of it to see the results in a very in a very stepped approach, I would say. So that may be why we perhaps see things slightly different. Very much a can-do attitude. So yeah, I would say I try and resonate with people that is me, obviously, because I'm not into that sort of thing. I want to solve a problem, because all the military and anybody in a uniform, probably frontline services, we're all about problem solving. Certainly in a sort of high stress, demanding environment.
Yes, and I guess to some extent, I come from a military family. I'm the only person who's never served in the military in my family. I was the last not to serve. There's very much I guess you call it esprit de corps, or a way of thinking that is fostered within military or frontline environments, where it may be in incredible danger, may have to make decisions at very high stress. And part of that is building trust, isn't it? Trusting the person, the man or the woman standing next to you. And that's not easily fostered for some people in the military outside that environment, is it?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I think humans in general, whether we like it or not, are a fairly judgmental bunch. And that's why you resonate in close-knit groups. And we are, whether you like it or not. I rub shoulders with people under the same high-stress environment. Police do, ambulance service do, the fire service do, prison service do. We tend to have that approach. It sounds awful, but civvies wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
Which is it's got its good and bad points as well. Because I think, if you're an exceptional therapist, then you would understand. But you know as well as I do, you've got to get that rapport.
Yeah.
Which is a key part of any therapy. So yeah, I do think we're a close bunch, and it is based on trust and knowing that the man that you're rubbing shoulders with next to you, whatever uniform you wear, has probably been in the same sorts of situations that you have.
Yeah, and I also kind of think, having worked with military personnel through the years, is that there's a sense that some of us might not understand what they've gone through and what they've had to do. I can think of a number of people I've worked with who, shall we say, at the sharp end of the military, and people can take away what that really means, but have taken life, have seen their comrades die, and it's not something that is usually talked about when people come home, is it? They don't say, "Never guess what I did today." It's a case of get on with it, which is, I guess, why so many frontline serving personnel, we'll call them, may struggle greatly with things like post-traumatic stress or anxiety, or just refitting back into a normal kind of family environment.
Yeah, I would agree. I had to get my thinking cap on and work, from an inside, what happens when I've been in them stressful environments. And actually, when you think about it, we've been pre-programmed. I've served nearly 26 years, and I'm taught to delay or discount emotions because they can't get in. Whether you're a serving soldier that's on a battlefield, then is not the time. Yeah. And if you're a policeman and you're dealing with things on a street on front line, that is not the time. You are taught to almost kick that down the road. Yeah. And then deal with it later, which I think we're much better at it now, Rory. And I think that's not going to go away. I don't want to be a blubbering mess when I'm actually delivering frontline, output, either in the military or any kind of uniform service. But the downside of that is we've got to deal with it at some point. And everybody's different, so they all deal with it in different ways, is what I would say. And it's not, and I can add to that, it's not all about work stress either. No, because people, long deployments or working shifts or working back-to-back shifts, they come back and then they've got to come away from what can be a frontline environment, police officers, men and women, soldiers, airmen, Navy, and then come back and, play with the kids' toys. I mean, that, and literally in some cases you could be on the battlefield one day, at home the next because of transport, can't you? It is. And I mean, even in my past, without giving too many details away, you can be on a front line in the morning and then at home in an afternoon.
Wow.
So it is. Now, it's the classics of, I've seen X, Y, and Z on the battlefield. You've seen people die. You see a lot of traumatic things. And that does, and I'm not discounting that for people, PTSD and all the rest of it. You can see some fairly funky stuff out there and be under tremendous stress. But there's equal stress when you come home and you're having to deal with what probably you deal with, or anybody deals with.
Yeah.
Your 13-year-old girl's being a pain in the ass. Your son wouldn't come off your Xbox. You're having arguments. You're having arguments with your missus.
Yeah.
It's that cup of stress that we all talk about. That perhaps just trying to lower it.
Yeah.
Trying to give yourself a bit more capacity to work out. And in my experience, it's not always the classic, guy in a helicopter in Afghanistan or Iraq that's seen lots of things that come home, and that tips the edge.
Yeah.
It's some of the other stuff as well that you're having, and it is. Having been deployed away lots of times, and people back me up on this through where I speak to, you do feel a bit of an outsider when you come back, and which could be really difficult when you're coming back with your wife and 2 kids.
Yeah.
You've got to integrate back into their life, and they've got to allow you back in. So it is not always they paint the picture in the media and on film these days that it's the classic. Well, this guy's either shot somebody or he's been shot at or his friend's died. Now, I'm not saying that happens, and it does happen, and people have a tough time with that. It's not just that though, Rory. It's the other stuff as well.
Yeah, it's the integrating from maybe being in fear of your life in the morning, and then coming home in the afternoon. And still carrying that, you might have to go to Tesco's to pick your groceries up.
Yeah, it is, because they're all problems. And I think that's in CBT, that's where it's great at, because it's fairly straight problem solving, in the fact that what do you want? What is this for you? What impact does it have for you? And how can you reduce that? What's another way of thinking about it? And I'll speak from experience when it is sometimes how to speak to your missus and your kids, how not to get stressed. Because if you've got that connection at home or with your friend group or with your parents or your family or your close family, if you can perhaps open up a bit more easier, life gets a little easier.
Yeah.
And we do, whether we're better now, Rory, than we've ever been, but I'll speak, I'm a fairly stoic dude. I like to shoulder a lot of it.
Yeah.
And there still is that, I wouldn't say it's a tough guy mentality, but it's mine to shoulder, not yours.
Yeah.
When realistically, we can all have a good friend, or somebody you could trust, or to say, like a therapist or somebody else you can speak to, where you can offload, and people can. We all know this. It's the times when you're in the bar when you're talking about the tough stuff that make it easier.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that kind of brings us neatly on, and you have touched on this, into that mixing of modalities. So you use cognitive behavioural therapy, and from the sound of it, you've asked you would be working with clients to reframe their view of the world, or look for another solution, or look for a different view. Would that be roughly right?
Yeah, it is. It's like, what's your problem? And what do you want? And I think I'll ask a lot of people, and I'm still surprised at how many people say, I don't know what I want.
Yeah.
Definitely when you start talking about the tough subjects, relationships is tough. Yeah. And there's a lot of taboo subjects in there.
Yeah.
As well as where you're going in life. Because, you're given, whether we like it or not, that's the way we're trained in a certain way. To do a certain job, it comes with it a lot of camaraderie and trust, like what you said. And when I've been away, I deploy away with some enormously capable people. And it's like when I go through my front door, when I'm dealing with kids and my missus, there's no immediate action drills or flight reference cards, or there's no SOP.
Standard operating procedure.
And you feel a bit naked sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to admit the truth, that sometimes we struggle, and then be able to reach out for help as the other one. So it is that kind of thing with CBT when it's taking somebody. I would always ask, what do you want? How does it impact your life to work? Rather than me impose what my life is on you, Rory, I would say, how does it impact you? Why is this a problem for you? And what do you want? So get clear on what you want, which CBT is really good for.
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't be the only one who's listening to this. I'm sure the audience have picked up you're a pretty straightforward talking guy.
Yeah, I'm trying my best not to swear.
yeah, and again,
and it's not for everybody.
No,
I rub shoulders with a guy who's an infidelity coach. He's very softly spoken, and he's more akin to a counsellor. And there's people out there, that would resonate with him. Yeah. And I do realise that I'm probably not going to resonate with everybody.
Yeah.
I will, and I would say that it will be if I were working with you, Rory, I would say it's going to be a fairly uncomfortable journey, my friend.
Yeah.
You will not like where you're going, but you will face the truth.
Yeah.
And at times, you may even, in fact, you'll definitely not like where you are.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I've had some coaching, and I found the coaching a lot more useful in certain aspects of my life than therapy. The therapy I had was great, but the directness of someone, and in fact, my coach was an ex Special Forces guy, and he was very direct, and I felt that was really useful because it was cutting through the BS. It was a case of saying, look, this is what I'm seeing. What are you doing? And here's the thing, it's not the usual approach therapists take, but for some people, and myself included, I found that incredibly useful. Let me ask you then, we talked about the CBT, how do you then blend in the hypnotherapy aspect? Where's that useful?
That's useful. I mean, one of the tools that hypnotherapy is great for is relaxation. Yeah. And the amount of people I've said, when you ask them, have you ever formally been taught how to relax? I would say the answer mainly is no.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't come with a standard operating procedure or immediate action drill. Here's how to relax. Here's how to breathe. Here's something that you can listen to that can help you relax and making that automatic. So, hypnotherapy in itself is it works better if you're relaxed and you're able to accept a suggestion. And the way I describe that to some clients sometimes is, we all know the Paul McKenna dancing on stage with a broom, thinking it's Michelle Pfeiffer or whatever, a beautiful model, or acting like a chicken or everything else. This is not for the audience's benefit. This is for your benefit. Yeah. So instead of me speaking to you and getting you to relax and accept suggestions for the benefit of laughs, I'm doing it for the benefit in putting you in a better place, making you more confident, giving you more self-belief. And it might be just a simple tool that somebody listens to every day for 10 minutes that will help them relax. Yeah. I find that as well, Rory. I wouldn't ask any client that I work with that I've not been through and I've not tried and I know that works. Yeah. I'm not, like you said, I'm fairly straight talking. I'm not into BS.
Yeah.
I know this works, and that gap between what happens outside and you reacting, there is a gap there. If you can lengthen that just to get more control about yourself, be able to relax.
Yeah.
Then I'm preaching to the converted, because if you've worked with anybody in a Special Forces community, they are the cutting edge of no BS, straight talking. And even when I started this 10 years ago, when I started doing things like mindfulness, and listening to hypnotherapy and everything else, I was surprised when you can Google it. Special forces people, top business people, CEOs. Yeah, they're all. It's visualization. Top athletes are using techniques to help them relax, give themselves a better frame of mind and move forward. That's the way I would use it. So CBT is me asking where you want to go, maybe a bit of role play, getting the problem solving out there and what it means for you, as well as pushing you down that road. And like I said, I will push you into a T-junction. It's not comfortable. I'm gonna make you turn left or right and make a decision. I would say the hypnotherapy makes the going down the road and getting to that T-junction and making the turn left or right slightly easier, because you'll believe in yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, isn't it? I'm sure there'll be people listening here who think, gosh, my practice, this is not what I do. But I guess I remind myself it'd be best fit for client. Your client is looking for something specific, and working with you, they know what they were getting. And the other thing that really strikes me, and I was just thinking back, if my father was looking for therapists. My father's been dead over 40 years. I would bet my bottom dollar he'd probably see you rather than me.
Me,
yeah,
and again, it's that walking. It's a bit like when I did my course in Cognitive Behavioural Hypnotherapy. There were a lot of school teachers, and I don't know why this is, by the way. A lot of school teachers do hypnotherapy, and initially there's a huge resistance to go back to school because they've just escaped that world. But they end up back there, and then you're going to say, well, why do they end up back there?
Yeah.
Well, they understand the history of it, and the business coach I work with, who's very no nonsense, by the way. Somebody said about him the other day, he's classed as a positive punch to the face, which I think is a really good analogy. He said, if you don't go back and help people that are in the military or uniformed service, he says, you're insane. He said, you can build a level of rapport that other people can't even dream of, because they will immediately warm to you because, and I think in some ways, if people are listening to this, and I'm in lots of coaching and therapy groups as well, is underneath you're trying to help yourself out from probably 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah,
I'm trying to help me and what problems I went through probably 15 years ago. In some way, shape, or form, and anybody else anybody else you can reach out and you can help. That's why we're in the industry, I think, for the majority of therapists and coaches and counsellors and everybody else that helps us.
Well, if you're interested in Adam's work or website, or you need to refer him anywhere, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to episode 274 of the podcast tab. His details are in the show notes, and as I say, it's a different approach to perhaps traditional therapy, but one that fits a certain demographic and one that sounds to me like it works. So, Adam Cooper, thank you so much for joining us.
Massive thank you to Adam Cooper. Thank you to you, Rory, for continuously reaching out and finding the right people to come and I guess broaden our horizons as the listeners. You have been listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 274.
Yes, we started off with student services, settling into a new counselling group. That slightly maybe uncomfortable feeling of bonding with a new group, and we've talked about the theories and the process and why it was important that it kind of matches and mirrors maybe a client's journey onto ethical, sustainable practice. And we talk about cultural competency, what you might need to think about, what introspection you may need to go through to think about how can you work with people from what is becoming now a more diverse society. And then finally, we caught up with Adam Cooper, interview on cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy. And if you've liked this podcast, why don't you share it on your social media, on your Twitters, on your LinkedIns, on your whatever social media you use, your TikToks, and share it with your friends and use the appropriate hashtags. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Lees Oaks to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.